I'm Viondra Kellen, and at 28, I stood in a room of polished oak and sneering faces, my boots still crusted with the morning's cattle feed, while my family laughed that I smelled like a barn gone sour. They thought I was a stain on the Kellen family crest, a farm girl who'd wandered into their Virginia estate by mistake. But what they didn't know, what hit them like a thunderclap, was that I'd just inherited a $12.5 million trust, every cent of Grandpa's legacy, and he'd caught their every cruel word on cameras they never saw. The air in the Kellen manor carried the sharp tang of lavender polish, a scent so thick it smothered the faint whiff of hay clinging to my flannel shirt. I'd driven straight from the farm, the truck's engine still warm, because the cows don't wait for anyone, not even for a will reading that summoned me after years of family silence. My cousin, Marissa, leaned toward her husband, her voice a stage whisper, saying I must have rolled in dung before coming. Snickers rippled across the mahogany table, where crystal glasses gleamed under a chandelier that cost more than my modular farmhouse. I didn't flinch, my hands folded in my lap, calluses rough against my own skin, because I'd learned long ago that storms don't care if you scream back. The estate's marble floors gleamed, reflecting Aunt Sylvia's diamond ring as she adjusted it for the camera crew tucked in the corner, a detail most missed, but not me. Grandpa had always been meticulous, wiring those lenses himself, and I'd helped him thread them through the crown molding 3 summers back, never guessing they'd captured this moment. Their laughter wasn't new. Marissa had called me barn girl at every Thanksgiving since I was 12, but today it carried a weight I couldn't yet name. The lawyer, Mr. Harrow, stepped through the double doors, his silver hair catching the light like a blade, and the room hushed, their smirks frozen, waiting for the wealth they'd already spent in their minds. I sat near the table's end, my chair creaking, and felt the first spark of something sharp. Not anger, but clarity, because Grandpa had seen them, really seen them, and soon they'd know it too. Stick around to see how this unfolds, because the truth was about to crack their world wide open. And if you're hooked, hit that subscribe button for the latest stories from this channel, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. The chandelier's light fractured into tiny prisms, dancing across the mahogany table where my family sat, their postures stiff with expectation, fingers tracing the edges of untouched crystal glasses. My boots, still dusted with Virginia clay, left a faint smear on the marble floor, a silent rebellion against the estate's sterile perfection. Marissa's husband, Preston, leaned back, his cufflinks glinting as he murmured something about my flannel being better suited for a scarecrow. The room chuckled, a low, practiced sound, like they'd rehearsed this scorn since I was a girl hauling feed sacks while they sipped rosé on the veranda. I kept my eyes on the table's grain, tracing its swirls, my pulse steady despite the heat creeping up my neck. The air held the weight of their perfume, Chanel and arrogance, clashing with the faint scent of alfalfa still woven into my hair from the morning's chores. Mr. Harrow, the lawyer, unfolded his papers with a deliberateness that silenced the room, his face as unreadable as the granite cliffs near the farm. He began with the smaller bequests, his voice a metronome, each word landing like a gavel. To my uncle, Randall Kellen, Grandpa left the Outer Banks beach house and a collection of modernist paintings, assets Randall accepted with a nod, his tie straightened as if he'd expected nothing less. Aunt Sylvia, her earrings catching the light like tiny stars, inherited the vintage Jaguar and a set of rare first edition books, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Marissa, my cousin, was granted the Manhattan loft and a diamond-encrusted watch that once belonged to Grandma, a prize she clutched with a gasp, her eyes darting to me as if to measure my envy. I gave her none, my hand still in my lap, though my knuckles whitened, remembering how Grandpa once let me wind that watch, its ticks loud in the quiet barn. The room's smugness thickened, their laughter from earlier now a quiet hum of triumph, as if my absence from the will confirmed I was nothing more than the farm girl they'd always dismissed. A younger cousin, Tessa, whispered to her brother, loud enough for me to hear, that I'd probably inherit a shovel, if anything at all. I didn't look up, but I felt the camera lens above us, tucked into the chandelier's ornate frame, its silent gaze a promise Grandpa had made years ago when we wired it together. He tapped the lens and said in that gravelly voice that truth shows itself when folks think they're alone. My skin prickled, not from their words, but from a memory that surfaced, sharp and unbidden. 3 summers back, Grandpa pulling me into the tool shed, the air thick with cedar and oil, showing me a grainy clip of Randall mocking my patched jeans at a family dinner. Their noise is their weakness, he'd said, and I hadn't understood until now. The will reading marched on, each bequest a brick in the wall they built to keep me out, their eyes avoiding mine, as if I were a smudge they could ignore. But I wasn't here for their approval, nor for the scraps they thought I deserved. I was here because Grandpa had called me, not with a letter or a phone call, but with a trust I'd felt in every fence post I'd mended, every dawn I'd risen before the roosters. And then Grandpa paused, his fingers lingering on a page, his eyes flicking to me for the first time, a spark of something, maybe warning, before he cleared his throat. The room leaned forward, their breaths held, sensing a shift, but not yet grasping its weight. My heart kicked harder, not from fear, but from the certainty that whatever came next would tear their carefully polished world apart. Mr. Harrell's paws hung like a storm cloud, the room's air tightening as my family's eyes darted between his hands and the papers, their greed a palpable pulse beneath their tailored suits and practiced smiles. My boots pressed into the marble, grounding me, the faint grit of farm dust, a reminder of the fields where I'd always found truth over polish. The lawyer's voice resumed, steady and cold, slicing through the tension as he awarded Tessa, my younger cousin, a Napa Valley vineyard and a stake in Grandpa's rare coin collection. Tessa's fingers, manicured and gleaming, tapped her phone, already calculating her windfall, her smirk a mirror of Marissa's earlier triumph. To Marissa's husband, Preston, went a Miami condo and Grandpa's antique firearm collection, a bequest he acknowledged with a smug tilt of his chin as if he'd earned it by marrying into the family. Aunt Sylvia leaned toward Randall, whispering something that made him chuckle, their ease a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. My name remained unspoken, a void in the litany of assets, each omission sharpening the room's quiet amusement. Tessa's brother Lyle leaned forward, his voice low but deliberate, suggesting I might inherit the old tractor, rusted in the barn. The laughter that followed was softer now, more confident, as if my exclusion was a foregone conclusion. I kept my gaze on my hands, calloused from years of baling hay, the faint scar on my thumb from a barbed wire mishap, a map of my life's work. Their mockery wasn't new. Lyle had once tossed a napkin at me during a family barbecue, saying it was for the manure girl. But today, it carried a different weight, like a prelude to something inevitable. My mind drifted to the cameras, those silent sentinels Grandpa and I had hidden in the estate's nooks 3 summers ago. We'd crouched in the attic, sweat beading on my neck as he showed me how to angle a lens behind a painting, his eyes glinting with purpose. "Folks reveal themselves when they think no one's watching," he'd said, and I'd nodded, not fully grasping the stakes. Now I felt the weight of that moment, the memory anchoring me as Mr. Harrow turned another page, his fingers slower, deliberate, as if the paper itself resisted what came next. The room's smugness faltered, a flicker of unease passing over Marissa's face, her diamond watch catching the light like a warning flare. I thought of a clip I'd seen on Grandpa's old laptop, one I wasn't meant to find. Aunt Sylvia, after a Christmas party, laughing to Randall that I was better suited to cleaning stalls than sitting at their table. Grandpa had watched it in silence, his jaw tight, and later left a note in my coat pocket. Their words are their chains, not yours. The memory steadied me, my pulse slowing as I glanced at the chandelier where a camera lens gleamed, barely visible, its gaze unyielding. My family saw only the wealth they craved, but I saw the truth Grandpa had wired into this house, a truth that was about to unravel their carefully stitched lies. Mr. Harrow cleared his throat, his eyes meeting mine for a split second, a signal I couldn't yet decode. The room leaned in, their breaths shallow, sensing a shift but blind to its shape. And I felt the first tremor of something vast, like the ground before a stampede, ready to upend everything they thought they owned. The room's air grew taut, like a wire stretched to snapping, as Mr. Harrow's fingers lingered on the page, his paws a silent drum roll that made my family's smug grins falter. My boots, still flecked with Virginia soil, pressed harder into the marble, anchoring me against the tide of their expectations. The lawyer's voice, when it returned, carried a new weight, announcing a revised will, dated only weeks before Grandpa's death, splitting the $12.5 million trust evenly among Randall, Sylvia, Marissa, and their kin. Viondra Kellen, he read, was deemed unfit for such responsibility, her inexperience a risk to the family's legacy. A ripple of triumph swept the table, Marissa's laugh sharp as glass, her eyes glinting with victory as she leaned into Preston, whispering something that made him smirk. Randall straightened his tie, his relief palpable, while Aunt Sylvia's diamond ring flashed, catching the chandelier's light like a signal of her restored dominance. My pulse quickened, not from shame, but from a spark of suspicion that burned hotter with every word. The document's font, visible as Mr. Harrow held it up, was wrong, too modern, too crisp for Grandpa's old typewriter, the one he'd used for every legal paper since I was a girl. I remembered a night last fall, Grandpa pulling me into the barn, the air thick with straw and motor oil, his voice low as he warned me about false papers. "Trust your eyes," he'd said, handing me a sample of his will's typeface, the letters uneven from decades of use. "They'll try to rewrite what they can't earn." Now, as the family's laughter softened into murmurs of approval, I felt the weight of that warning, my gaze flicking to the camera lens hidden in the chandelier's ornate frame. Grandpa had wired this house to see what they hid. And I'd helped him, threading cables through the attic's dust, never imagining I'd be the one to uncover their deceit. Tessa, emboldened, leaned toward Lyle, her voice a stage whisper, saying I'd be lucky to manage a pig bin, let alone millions. The room chuckled, but it was thinner now, less certain, as if they sensed the ground shifting beneath their polished shoes. My hands, calloused from years of mending fences, tightened in my lap, not in anger, but in clarity. A memory surged, unbidden. 2 summers ago, Grandpa showing me a grainy clip of Randall and Sylvia in the parlor, plotting to sway him into rewriting the will, their voices dripping with disdain for my barn girl ways. He'd shut the laptop with a snap, his eyes fierce. "They think they know me," he'd said. "They don't." Mr. Harrow's eyes met mine again, a fleeting glance that carried the weight of a shared secret, and I knew he'd seen the same flaw in the document I had. The room's smugness hung fragile, their triumph built on a lie that was about to crack wide open, and I felt the first tremor of truth rising, like the wind before a storm, ready to sweep their carefully crafted facade away. The room's smug air shattered as Mr. Harrow reached for a remote, his movements deliberate, like a man unveiling a long-hidden truth. My family's triumphant murmurs faded, their eyes narrowing as a screen flickered to life behind him, casting a pale glow across the mahogany table where their greed had taken root. Grandpa appeared not in the suit they'd expected, but in his faded denim jacket, the one I'd patched at the elbow when I was 16. His face weathered but fierce, eyes burning with a clarity that made the chandelier's prisms seem dull. My boots pressed into the marble, steadying me, the faint scent of alfalfa still clinging to my flannel, a tether to the farm where I'd learned to stand tall. His voice, gravelly and unyielding, filled the room, praising my grit, my early mornings mucking stalls while they slept, my hands that knew the weight of a shovel and the rhythm of the land. He declared the true will, unaltered, granting me the entire $12.5 million trust, every acre, every account, every key to the Callan legacy. Chaos erupted, Marissa's scream slicing through the silence, her diamond watch glinting as she pointed at me, accusing me of twisting Grandpa's mind. Randall's face reddened, his tie askew, shouting that I'd coerced an old man, while Aunt Sylvia clutched her pearls, her voice shrill, claiming the video was a fake, a cruel trick. I sat still, my pulse racing but my hands steady. My gaze drifted to the camera lens tucked in the chandelier's frame, its silent vigil, a promise Grandpa had kept. Their outrage was a storm, but I'd weathered worse. Blizzards that froze the barn doors, droughts that cracked the earth, and I knew this tempest would pass. A memory flashed, sharp and vivid. Last spring, Grandpa and I in the tool shed, the air thick with grease and cedar, watching a clip of Marissa and Preston on the veranda, plotting to sway him with flattery and wine. He chuckled, but his eyes were steel. "They think they're clever," he'd said. "They're just loud." Preston stood now, his cufflinks flashing, as he demanded a legal review, his voice shaking with the desperation that betrayed his polished veneer. Tessa's smirk was gone, her phone forgotten, while Lyle muttered about lawsuits, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Grandpa's words. I felt their eyes on me, not with scorn now, but with something raw. Fear, maybe, or the dawning realization that their lies had been seen. The forged will, with its too crisp font, was a gamble they'd lost, and I knew the cameras held more, evidence of their deceit woven into the estate's very walls. Mr. Harrow raised a hand, his voice cutting through their clamor, confirming the true will's authenticity, notarized and ironclad. The room stilled, their protests choking on the truth, and I felt a spark of something fierce, not triumph, but certainty, like the first light breaking over the fields after a long night. The room's tension coiled tighter, a live wire sparking beneath the chandelier's gleam, as Mr. Harrow tapped the screen, summoning a second video that made my family's faces drain of color. My boots, still caked with Virginia earth, anchored me to the marble floor, my pulse steady despite the storm of their fading protests. Grandpa's image flickered into view, this time from a handheld camera, the frame shaky, capturing him in the barn's dim light, straw dust swirling around his denim jacket. His voice, softer but razor-sharp, spoke of betrayal, revealing footage of Randall and Sylvia hunched over a desk in the study, forging the revised will with a stolen notary stamp, their whispers caught clear as day. Marissa gasped, her diamond watch slipping from her wrist as she clutched Preston's arm, while Aunt Sylvia's pearls rattled against her chest, her eyes wide with a panic that stripped her polish bare. Randall's tie hung loose, his hands trembling, as he sank into his chair, the weight of exposure crushing his earlier bravado. The video shifted, showing Marissa and Preston on the estate's back porch, laughing as they planned to sell the farmland for condos once Grandpa was gone, their voices dripping with disdain for the fields I'd tended since I was a girl. The room froze, their shame a tangible force, heavier than the lavender-scented air. I stood, my flannel shirt creased from hours in the truck, and let my gaze sweep the table, meeting their eyes for the first time. I'd been managing the trust's finances for 2 years, I revealed, through a discreet LLC Grandpa had set up, negotiating crop yields and equipment leases while they posed for Instagram in city lofts. A memory surged, vivid and grounding. Grandpa and I in the attic,
wiring a camera behind a portrait, his hand steady as he taught me to thread the lens. "They'll show you who they are," he'd said, and I'd nodded, the weight of his trust heavier than the tools in my hands. Tessa's phone clattered to the table, her smirk replaced by a flush of guilt, while Lyle muttered about legal loopholes, his voice thin, grasping at straws. Preston's cufflinks no longer gleamed, his posture slouched, as if the video had siphoned his confidence.
Mr. Harrow's voice cut through, affirming the true will's legality, backed by independent counsel, but Randall interrupted, his face flushed, vowing to sue, claiming I'd manipulated Grandpa's trust. The threat hung heavy, a new battle looming, but I felt the camera's silent vigil, their footage a shield I'd helped forge. My hands, calloused from years of hauling feed, rested on the table, not in defiance, but in certainty. I'd seen their deceit in grainy clips, heard their scorn in stolen moments, and now with the truth laid bare, I knew the fight wasn't over, it was just beginning, and I was ready. The estate's marble halls echoed with the fading clamor of my family's threats, their voices swallowed by the weight of Grandpa's footage, but a new storm brewed in their narrowed eyes, plotting retribution. My boots, still bearing the faint stale grit from the farm, carried me to the guest room that night, where the air smelled of starch and old wood, a quiet refuge from their venom. A thick cream envelope lay on the bedside table, its edges worn, my name, Viondra, scrawled in Grandpa's jagged script. Inside was a single sheet, his words sparse but heavy, a code to a safe hidden in the barn's loft, and a warning to guard what I'd find, because they'd come for it. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the spark of purpose his words ignited, a memory surfacing of last summer, when he'd shown me the safe, rusted and tucked behind hay bales, saying it held truths they'd kill to bury. I thought he was joking, his eyes crinkling, but now the weight of his trust pressed against my ribs. By dawn, I'd cracked the safe, my flashlight catching the glint of documents, ledgers detailing Randall's siphoned profits from the farm's accounts, Sylvia's forged signatures on land deals, and a notarized letter proving they'd bribed a clerk to alter the will. The papers trembled in my hands, not from cold, but from the realization that Grandpa had armed me for this fight long before they'd laughed at my boots. I hired a lawyer, Miss Carver, a woman with a gaze like flint and a reputation for dismantling liars, her office a stark contrast to the estate's opulence, its walls lined with case files instead of oil paintings. She pored over the documents, her nod confirming their power, and we filed a countersuit, exposing my family's fraud to block their legal challenge. Randall's lawsuit claimed I'd coerced Grandpa, but the ledgers painted a different story. He'd skimmed thousands from crop sales, funneling them to offshore accounts, while I negotiated subsidies to keep the farm alive. Sylvia's plan to sell the fields for condos, caught on camera, was now a public record, her greed a noose tightening around her legacy. A memory flickered, sharp and warm. Grandpa and I in the pasture, mending a fence under a bruising sky, his voice low as he said, "They'll try to break what you build, but truth holds stronger than wire." I'd laughed, thinking he meant the fence, but now I saw the deeper lesson, etched in the documents I clutched. Marissa's late-night text buzzed my phone, her tone syrupy, offering to help manage the trust, followed by Sylvia's email suggesting I was in over my head. I ignored them, their words as hollow as the laughter they'd aimed at me, but the threat of their lawsuit loomed, a shadow over the fields I'd sworn to protect. The farm workers, loyal hands who toiled under my family's neglect, gathered at dawn, their faces lined with worry but eyes fierce, ready to stand with me. Their trust, earned through years of shared sweat, was a fire that burned hotter than my family's schemes, and I knew the battle ahead would test every ounce of grit I'd carried since I was a girl called Barn Girl. The Virginia dawn broke sharp and cold, painting the fields in streaks of gold as I stood among the farm workers, their calloused hands gripping coffee mugs, their breaths misting in the crisp air. My boots sank into the soil, the same earth I'd defended against my family's greed, and I felt the weight of their trust, heavier than the ledgers now locked in Ms. Carver's safe. I rallied the workers, not with promises of wealth, but with a plan to save the land, outlining how we'd block Randall's condo scheme by proving the farm's value to the county's Heritage Board. Their nods, firm and quiet, were a language I'd learned long before the estate's marble halls, forged in years of hauling hay beside them, while my family sipped wine in city lofts. My mind drifted to the years they'd called me Barn Girl, the nickname spat at family reunions when I arrived with dirt under my nails, Marissa's laugh sharp as she tossed me a towel to clean up. I'd swallowed the sting then, but now it fueled me, each memory a brick in the wall I built against their lies. A new discovery tightened the stakes. Ms. Carver uncovered bank records showing Sylvia had bribed a notary with $50,000 to backdate the forged will, the transaction buried in a shell company but traced through Grandpa's ledgers. The evidence was a blade, sharp and ready, but wielding it meant facing my family in court where their polished facades would clash with my mud-stained truth. I walked the fields at dusk, the horizon smudged with clouds, and felt the land's pulse under my feet, a rhythm I'd known since I was a girl racing Grandpa to the barn. He'd taught me to read the soil's needs, to mend what broke, and now I mended his legacy, not for glory, but because it was mine to carry. The workers' children ran past, their laughter echoing where condos might have stood, and I saw the future we'd protect, a place where kids learn to plant seeds, not chase profits. A memory surfaced, vivid and warm. Grandpa handing me a wrench saying, "Strength isn't loud, Viondra. It's what holds when everything else falls." Sylvia's email arrived that night, her tone softer, offering to advise me on the trust. But I saw the desperation beneath her words, the same panic I'd seen in her eyes when the video played. Randall's lawyer sent a settlement offer promising a slice of the trust if I dropped the suit, but I tore it up. The papers rip louder than their hollow promises. The community rallied, local farmers pledging affidavits to the Heritage Board, their stories of the Kellen Farm's history a chorus that drowned out my family's schemes. Their support was a fire in my chest, but the courtroom loomed, a battlefield where truth would face lies, and I knew every scar from my barn girl years would be armor for the fight ahead. The courtroom's oak-paneled walls loomed like the cliffs near the farm, unyielding and cold, but my boots, still flecked with Virginia soil, grounded me as I faced my family across the aisle, their polished suits a stark contrast to my flannel's worn weave. The air carried the faint tang of ink and old paper, a reminder of the ledgers that had brought us here, their truths sharper than any lawyer's words. Miss Carver stood beside me, her voice steady as she presented Grandpa's documents, each page a blow. Bank records tracing Sylvia's $50,000 bribe to the notary, ledgers exposing Randall's siphoned profits, and the grainy footage of Marissa and Preston plotting to carve the farm into condos. The judge's eyes narrowed, her pen scratching notes, while my family's faces tightened, their earlier confidence fraying like cheap thread. Sylvia's pearls gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but her hands trembled, betraying the panic she'd hidden behind her Chanel facade. Randall's tie hung crooked, his whispers to his lawyer frantic, while Marissa's diamond watch caught the light, a futile shield against the evidence piling higher. Preston's cufflinks no longer flashed, his posture slouched, as if the weight of their greed had finally broken him. The community's affidavits, stacked thick as a harvest bundle, spoke of the farm's century-long role in Virginia's heart, each farmer's story a root that anchored my claim. I felt their presence, those workers who'd stood with me at dawn, their calloused hands a silent vow to protect what my family sought to destroy. A memory flickered, vivid and fierce. Grandpa and I in the barn, the air thick with straw dust, as he handed me a rusted key to the safe, his voice low. "They'll try to bury you, Viondra, but truth grows stronger than lies." I'd clutched that key, not understanding its weight, but now it unlocked a legacy I'd fight to preserve. The judge's gavel fell, upholding the true will, declaring the forged document void, and the room exhaled, a collective release that left my family silent, their lawsuits crumbling like dry clay. I stood, my hands steady, not in triumph, but in the quiet certainty of a field after rain, ready to grow anew. Back at the farm, I transformed the old tobacco barn into a youth farming academy, its walls lined with tools and sketches from kids who'd never known soil could tell stories. Every Saturday, teens from nearby towns learned to plant, their laughter louder than the estate's chandelier ever rang, and the community called it the Kellen Seed Hub, a name that stuck like dew on grass. The fields breathed again, workers' wages doubled, their families joining potlucks under the oak grove where condos would never stand. People nodded to me in town, calling me Miss Kellen, not out of duty, but respect, earned through sweat and scars from years they'd once mocked as barn girl days. The Virginia dusk settled soft, wrapping the fields in a hush, broken only by the rustle of clover as I stood on the academy's porch, my boots steady on weathered boards. The air carried damp soil and pine, a quiet hymn to the land I'd fought for, its roots woven into my choices. A cream envelope arrived, its gold-embossed crest a ghost of the Kellen estate's pride, holding a typed apology from Sylvia, Randall, and Marissa, their words sterile, like a contract unsigned. I held it over a candle, watching flames curl the paper to ash, the smoke rising like a final release from their hypocrisy. The farm thrived, its fields green with new crops, the tobacco barn now a bustling hub where teens planted seeds and dreams. I walked the academy's halls where walls bore sketches of sunflowers and tractors, each stroke a testament to kids who'd found pride in dirt, as I had. A mural unveiled that evening, painted on the barn side, my old work boots, laces frayed, soles caked with earth, titled Roots Reclaimed. The crowd's applause was warm, not for me, but for what we'd built, a legacy louder than my family's scorn. I thought of Grandpa, his denim jacket patched by my hands, his voice echoing in the wind that swept the fields. He'd taught me to mend fences with wire and grit, to see truth in soil, and now I felt him in every laugh from the potluck tables, every seed sown by young hands. My family's silence was their answer, their absence a choice I no longer mourned. I'd written nothing on their letter, sent no reply, letting the academy's light speak where their words failed. The land, the people, the truth, they were my home, not the marble halls I'd left behind. Standing under the oak grove, the stars sharp above, I felt no need to prove my worth. My hands, scarred from years of labor, held a quiet strength. And for the first time, I was Viondra Kellen, not the barn girl, but a woman who'd grown a legacy from mud and memory. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more tales of grit and truth. Your support keeps these stories alive.